January 17th, 1920. Midnight. The saloons went dark across America, and for 13 years the country was supposed to be dry. It wasn't. It just went underground, through a false bookshelf, behind a door that only opened if you knew the word. And in those basements, the food got better. Not worse. Better. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. Prohibition built the modern restaurant. Every speakeasy needed a kitchen, because a kitchen was the alibi. The men running these rooms weren't chefs. They were criminals who understood that good food sells trust, and trust sells everything else. 30 dishes, 30 alibis. This is the food that built American crime. Number 30. Deviled eggs, a hard-boiled egg split clean down the middle. The yolk pulled out and mashed with mustard and vinegar until it turned pale and grainy, spooned back into the white. 2 cents an egg in 1925. A nickel got you 4 halves and a reason to order another drink. This was not an appetizer. Salt and fat make a man thirsty, and a thirsty man doesn't watch the clock. Speakeasy owners in Chicago and New York kept trays moving table to table all night, not because the food mattered, but because the silence between drinks did. Every bite bought another round. Grandma just called it a deviled egg. The men running the back rooms of America called it inventory management. Number 29. Pigs in a blanket, a sliver of sausage, wrapped tight in dough no bigger than a playing card, baked until the seam went golden and the grease started to show. 8 cents bought you 3. You could eat it standing up, one hand still on your drink, eyes still on the door. Midwestern speakeasies in the late 1920s built half their menu around food you could eat without sitting down. Because sitting down meant you weren't watching, and not watching meant you might miss the signal to run. Pigs in a blanket wasn't comfort food here. It was tactical food, small enough to swallow in one motion if the lights cut out. Nothing wasted. Nothing slow. That was the whole point. Number 28. Potato salad. Boiled potatoes, still warm, tossed in mayonnaise gone soft and yellow near the stove, with mustard and chopped egg folded through. 10 cents a scoop. It fed a crowd, and crowds were the whole business model. A working-class speakeasy wasn't selling whiskey. It was selling a room full of people, because a packed room looked like a party, and a party looked legal. Potato salad was cheap enough to make in wash tubs and filling enough that nobody left hungry, which meant nobody left at all. They stayed, they drank, they paid. This was not a side dish. This was crowd control. Number 27. Fried chicken. A bird cut into 8 pieces, dredged in flour heavy with black pepper, dropped into fat hot enough to hiss the second it touched the pan. 20 cents a plate, and the smell alone pulled people off the street before they ever asked what was being poured in back. Fried chicken traveled north and west in the 1920s the same way bootleg liquor did, carried by people moving between cities, feeding rooms that had never tasted it before. A speakeasy that served real fried chicken, hot and right, didn't need much of a sign. The food did the advertising the law wouldn't let them do out loud. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. The chicken sold the room first. Number 26. Clam chowder. Cream gone thick with potato and salt pork, full of clams still tasting faintly of the harbor they came from, ladled hot into a bowl at 5 in the morning for men who had been on the water all night. 10 cents a bowl, served before the sun was even fully up. Boston's harborfront speakeasies didn't open for the evening crowd first. They opened for the rum runners coming in off the boats at dawn, half frozen, needing something hot before they could even talk about what they'd just hauled in past the Coast Guard. Clam chowder wasn't a starter course here. It was the first meal after a night spent breaking federal law on open water. That is not progressive. That is a meal built entirely around the hours nobody else was awake to see. Number 25. Meatloaf. Ground beef stretched thin with breadcrumbs and onion, bound with an egg, baked low and slow until the top went dark, and the inside stayed soft enough to fall apart under a fork. 15 cents a slice, a dish built entirely out of scraps that no butcher could sell whole. In the urban speakeasies of the 1920s, meatloaf did what it had always done in poor kitchens for decades before Prohibition ever started. It took the cheapest cuts and the smallest amounts and made them stretch across a full plate, a full table, a full night. The difference now was who was eating it. Bankers, bootleggers, men with more cash in their pockets than they'd ever had, still ordering the same dish their mothers made when there was nothing else. This was not poverty. This was muscle memory number 24. Spaghetti and meatballs, tomatoes cooked down for hours until the sauce went dark and sweet, poured over noodles boiled soft, with meatballs the size of a fist sitting on top, packed with garlic and a little stale bread soaked in milk to keep them tender. 20 cents a plate, and in some rooms the only thing on the menu at all. Italian-run speakeasies in New York and Chicago weren't fronts in the loose sense of the word. They were full restaurants, often legitimate businesses by day, that simply kept serving after the lights should have gone out. The kitchen ran exactly as it had before 1920, only the back room changed. This was the original blueprint for how organized crime hid in plain sight. A real menu, a real chef, and a door in the back that only some customers ever saw. Grandma just called it Sunday dinner. The men running these rooms called it the perfect cover, number 23. Hamburgers. Ground beef pressed flat and hard, seared fast on a griddle until the edges turned dark and crisp, slapped between two halves of a roll with a slice of onion and nothing else. 10 cents, no fork required. Speakeasies built around speed served hamburgers because they could be made in under 2 minutes and eaten in under 1. Critical math. When a raid could come through the door at any moment, and you needed every plate cleared fast. This was fast food before the term existed, built not for convenience but for survival. A hamburger left no evidence, no utensils to hide, no sauce to scrub off a tablecloth. They knew things about feeding a room under pressure that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. Number 22. Hot dogs. A boiled or grilled sausage, snapped into a soft bun, dragged through mustard with maybe a spoon of sauerkraut on top if the kitchen had it. A nickel. Sold openly, on a cart, right outside the door. This is the part nobody tells you. The hot dog cart parked outside a speakeasy wasn't just selling hot dogs. It was the cover story. A legal business in plain sight, run by a man who knew exactly what was happening downstairs and exactly how to look like he didn't. Police walked past hot dog carts every single night of Prohibition without a second glance, because a man selling sausages on a corner was the most unremarkable sight in America. That is not a snack. That is camouflage with mustard on it. Number 21. Corned beef hash. Leftover corned beef, chopped fine with potato and onion, pressed flat in a hot pan until a crust formed on the bottom, dark enough to crack like a shell, flipped once, served with an egg cracked right on top. 10 cents. This dish lived in the gray hours after closing, fed to men who had been drinking since before midnight and needed something heavy enough to absorb it before they went home. Corned beef hash wasn't on the dinner menu in most rooms. It was the last thing cooked before the lights went out, a final meal for the regulars who'd stayed past everyone else. She was right. Everything she knew was right. You don't waste the corned beef. You turn it into the thing that gets a man home standing up. Number 20. Mac and cheese. Elbow macaroni boiled soft, drowned in a sauce made from sharp cheddar, melted slow into milk and a little flour, baked until the top went brown and crackled. 12 cents a bowl, and in working-class speakeasies across the South, often the only hot food served all night. Cheap dairy, cheap starch, made in pans big enough to feed 40 people off one batch. A speakeasy didn't need a varied menu. It needed one dish it could make fast, make cheap, and make in bulk, because the goal was never culinary reputation. The goal was a packed room that stayed packed for hours. That is not a kid's dish. That is the math of running a crowd on a budget while the federal government pretended not to notice. Number 19. Baked beans with salt pork, navy beans soaked overnight, baked for hours in molasses, and a thick chunk of salt pork until the beans went dark and the fat rendered soft into the sauce. 12 cents a bowl, slow cooked the same way New England kitchens had cooked them since before the Revolution. There is a particular irony in a Puritan dish, built on thrift, built on patience, built on the same moral discipline that gave America Prohibition in the first place. Feeding rooms full of men breaking that exact law every single night. New England speakeasies served baked beans because it was what the kitchens already knew how to make. The recipe didn't care what was happening upstairs. This was not rebellion. This was old food, quietly outliving the politics built on top of it. Number 18. Crab cakes. Lump crab meat bound light with egg and a little cracker crumb, barely held together, fried just until the outside went golden and the inside stayed sweet and loose. 30 cents, expensive for the era, and it showed. Baltimore's harbor front speakeasies ran on the same boats that brought liquor up from the Chesapeake Bay, and some nights the crab and the contraband came off the same dock within an hour of each other. A crab cake wasn't just food here. It was proof the supply line worked, proof the boats were still running, proof the operation hadn't been caught. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. The seafood and the smuggling moved on the exact same tide. Number 17. Liver and onions. Beef liver sliced thin, dredged light in flour, fried fast in bacon fat alongside onions cooked down until they went sweet and dark at the edges. 12 cents a plate in the coal towns of eastern Pennsylvania, where the men eating it had just come off a shift and were about to start drinking until dawn. Liver was cheap because almost nobody wanted it, and it was packed with iron because the body doesn't care what something costs. Coal miners worked 12-hour shifts underground and needed that iron more than almost anyone else in America, even if none of them could have told you why. The science came decades later. The need was already there. They knew things about liver and onions that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. Number 16. Reuben sandwich, corned beef stacked thick, sauerkraut piled on top gone soft and sour, Swiss cheese melted over both, all of it pressed between 2 slices of rye grilled hard in butter until the crust went dark and crisp. 15 cents, built for one purpose: eating fast, eating greasy, and eating it standing at the bar at 1 in the morning, whether it was born in Omaha or in a late-night card game in New York is still argued today, but every speakeasy that claimed it agreed on the function. This was drunk food. Built heavy, built hot, built to be gone in 6 bites before the kitchen closed for the night. This was not fine dining. This was triage. Number 15. Shrimp cocktail. Boiled shrimp, chilled hard over ice, hung off the rim of a glass with a sharp red sauce in the bottom, served the way a man shows off a watch he didn't have last year. 20 cents. And in 1920s dollars, that was a statement. Southern coastal speakeasies served shrimp cocktail because it photographed well, looked expensive, and told every man in the room that this particular establishment had real money behind it. Bootleg money needed somewhere to land, and a chilled glass of shrimp on ice was as good a place as any to prove the operation was thriving. This was not seafood. This was a balance sheet served cold. Number 14. Chicken pot pie, leftover chicken, folded into a thick gravy with carrots and peas, poured into a dish and capped with a crust rolled thin enough to go crisp and dark on top while the inside stayed soft and steaming. 15 cents, and one of the few dishes that made a speakeasy feel less like a crime scene and more like somebody's dining room. Hotel and family-run rooms leaned on chicken pot pie because it dressed leftovers up as a full dinner. The same trick poor kitchens had used for generations, repackaged now for men who wanted to feel like they were somewhere respectable while doing something that absolutely was not. Grandma just called it not wasting the chicken. The bootleggers called it good business. Here's the part the history books leave out. A speakeasy wasn't just a hidden bar. Legally, on paper, in the eyes of any beat cop who walked past, it was a restaurant, a supper club, a private dining establishment that happened to serve alcohol the same way every restaurant in America had before 1920, quietly, and only if you asked the right way. That loophole was the entire business model. Men like the Genna brothers in Chicago and the organization built around Al Capone didn't just sell liquor. They built kitchens, hired real cooks, printed real menus, and ran legitimate-looking dining rooms specifically so the money moving through the building had somewhere respectable to come from on paper. The food wasn't a side business. The food was the laundering operation. Every plate of spaghetti, every bowl of chowder, every dollar spent on dinner gave the real product, the liquor, a legal-looking trail to hide inside. That is not a restaurant. That is one of the first documented uses of food service as financial cover in American organized crime. And it worked for 13 straight years. Number 13. Jambalaya, rice cooked down in a pot with sausage, chicken, and whatever shellfish the day's catch brought in, all of it simmered together until the rice went dark and sticky with the fat and spice of everything around it. 15 cents a bowl, and in New Orleans, one pot could feed a packed back room without anyone having to wait. This was efficiency wearing a Creole accent. A speakeasy running a full house didn't have time for individual orders. It needed one large pot that kept refilling itself all night, fast enough that nobody noticed the wait, hot enough that nobody complained about it. This was not a delicacy. This was crowd math, simmered for hours. Number 12. Codfish cakes, salted cod, soaked for a day to pull the salt back out, shredded fine and mixed with mashed potato, formed into small cakes and fried until the outside crackled. 8 cents. Cheap because salt cod had been cheap in New England fishing towns for over a century. The same boats that ran rum down from Canada into Massachusetts harbors had been hauling salt cod for generations before Prohibition ever started. Nothing about the supply chain changed. Only the cargo got more interesting. Codfish cakes fed the fishing town speakeasies because the fish was already there, already cheap, already part of a smuggling route that had simply added a second product. Nothing wasted. Not the fish. Not the boats. Number 11. Waldorf salad. Crisp apple cut small, celery sliced thin, walnuts broken rough, all of it bound together in mayonnaise gone pale and sweet, served cold in a small glass dish like something out of a hotel dining room, because it was. 20 cents, served in the hotel speakeasies that traced their lineage straight back to the Waldorf Astoria's own kitchens. This dish did something almost nobody else on the menu did. It looked wholesome. Fruit, nuts, a light dressing. Served at a table where a man might also be ordering bootleg gin, the Waldorf salad gave the whole meal a veneer of respectability, proof, on paper, that this was simply dinner. This was not a salad. This was a costume the rest of the meal wore. Number 10. Chili con carne. Beef simmered for hours with dried chiles, cumin, and beans, cooked down until the sauce went thick enough to coat a spoon and hold there. 10 cents a bowl, served hot along the Texas border and through the smuggling towns that ran liquor north out of Mexico, the same way other routes ran it south out of Canada. Chili fed both sides of the operation, the men loading trucks at the border and the men unloading them hours later, miles up the road, in rooms that all served some version of the same bowl. It was cheap, it reheated without losing anything, and it asked nothing of a kitchen that might need to disappear by morning. That is not a regional specialty. That is fuel for a supply chain. Number 9. Pickled pig's feet. Pig's feet boiled until the meat went soft and gelatinous, then packed into jars of vinegar brine with a little spice, left to sit until the texture turned cool and almost translucent. 5 cents, the cheapest item on almost every speakeasy menu in the South and through Appalachia. Even in rooms swimming in bootleg cash, even with bankers and bootleggers both drinking out of the same backroom glasses, somebody was still ordering the pig's feet. Old habits don't disappear just because the money showed up. The cooks who'd grown up wasting nothing kept making the dish that wasted nothing, whether or not anyone in the room still needed to save a nickel. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Even when nobody around her needed it to be anymore, there's a piece of this nobody talks about, and it has nothing to do with crime. It has to do with chemistry. Bartenders in the 1920s, most of them running these kitchens too, understood something that wouldn't be formally studied for decades. Salty, fatty food slows the absorption of alcohol into the bloodstream. A man who ate deviled eggs and pickled pig's feet and salt pork beans could drink for hours without falling apart, without getting sick, without becoming a liability the bar had to drag out the back door. This wasn't an accident. It was a documented tactic, repeated room after room, city after city. Keep the food cheap, keep it fatty, keep it coming, and the customer stays upright, stays buying, stays exactly long enough to spend everything in his pocket. Modern bars still do this. They just don't have to hide the liquor to get away with it anymore. That is not hospitality. That is a science experiment run on paying customers for 13 straight years, and almost nobody ever wrote it down. Number 8. French onion soup. Onions sliced thin and cooked down low for hours until they went dark and sweet, drowned in beef broth, topped with a crust of bread and cheese melted hard under the broiler until it bubbled at the edges. 18 cents, simmered for most of a day in the back of French immigrant-run cellar clubs across New York. There is something almost defiant about a dish that takes 8 hours to make, served in a room built for transactions that needed to happen in under 8 minutes. French onion soup didn't care about the speed of the business around it. It simmered on its own schedule, in its own pot, while everything else in the building moved as fast as the law allowed it not to be caught. That is not a loss. That is the one thing in the building that refused to rush. Number 7. Eggs Benedict and English muffins split and toasted, topped with a slice of ham. An egg poached soft enough to break open on the first cut. All of it covered in a hollandaise sauce gone thick and pale yellow. 25 cents, served at hotel speakeasy brunches across New York in the late 1920s. Brunch itself was new in the 1920s, a meal invented almost entirely to give midday drinking somewhere respectable to happen. Nobody questioned a man ordering a mimosa at 11 in the morning if there was a plate of eggs in front of him. The meal was the alibi. The hollandaise was the cover story. This was not breakfast. This was the invention of an entire excuse. Number 6. Welsh rarebit, sharp cheddar melted slow with beer and a little mustard until it turned into a thick, pourable sauce, poured hot over toast until the bread went soft underneath and crisp at the edges. 15 cents, and in New York, the dish that let an entire speakeasy legally call itself a restaurant. Late-night supper laws in some cities required an establishment to actually serve food after a certain hour to keep operating at all. Welsh rarebit was fast, cheap, and technically a full meal. Cheese, bread, and a sauce made partly with beer, which speakeasies could claim with a straight face was simply for flavor. This was not a snack. This was the fine print of the law, melted onto toast. Number 5. Lobster Newburg. Lobster meat folded into a sauce of cream, egg yolk, and a splash of sherry, cooked just until it thickened, served in a shallow dish with the lobster still glistening under the sauce. $1.25, more than most men in 1928 made in half a day's work, and exactly the point. High-end Manhattan speakeasies served lobster Newburg because bootleg money had nowhere else to go. You couldn't deposit it. You couldn't explain it. But you could spend it on a dollar lobster dish in a room nobody official was supposed to know existed, and feel, for 1 hour, like the money meant something. This was not dinner. This was a fortune eating itself in public. Number 4. Steak tartare, beef chopped raw and fine by hand, mixed cold with capers, onion, and a raw egg yolk on top, served with nothing cooked anywhere near it. 35 cents, served in the German-run cellar clubs of New York. There was a practical reason raw dishes showed up so often in speakeasy kitchens, beyond the taste. No cooking meant no smell drifting up through the floorboards, no smoke pulling attention from the street, no evidence of a kitchen running at hours a legal restaurant had no business being open. Steak tartare was silent food, served in a room that needed to stay that way. That is not a delicacy. That is a kitchen trying not to get caught. Number 3. Beef stroganoff. Strips of beef seared fast and hot, simmered briefly in a sauce of sour cream and mushroom until it went pale and rich, poured over egg noodles still steaming from the pot. 25 cents, served in the Russian Jewish immigrant speakeasies of the Lower East Side. On the menu it was billed as continental cuisine, sophisticated, European, worth the price. In the kitchen, it was an immigrant recipe carried straight across an ocean, cooked the same way it had been cooked in homes that had nothing to do with Manhattan at all. The dish didn't change. Only the price tag and the accent it was sold under did. This was not fine French cooking. This was somebody's grandmother's recipe, wearing a different name to survive in a new country. Number 2. Oysters Rockefeller. Oysters on the half shell, topped with a green mixture of butter, herbs, and breadcrumbs, broiled until the top went dark and crisp, while the oyster underneath stayed cool and barely cooked. 40 cents a half dozen, roughly 10 times what oysters cost on an open-air stand just a few blocks away. In New Orleans, this was the dish a speakeasy used to justify everything else on the bill. A room could charge whatever it wanted for supper, if the supper looked expensive enough, and oysters dressed up under a broiler with butter and herbs looked like exactly the kind of meal that came with a cover charge attached. The oysters weren't really the product. The room was. The oysters just made it believable. That is not seafood. That is a price tag with a shell around it. Number 1. Rum cake, a dense, dark cake soaked through with actual rum, baked until the top went sticky and caramelized, served as dessert under the name fruit cake on menus that needed to look perfectly innocent if anyone ever asked to see one. 15 cents a slice, and the single boldest dish on this entire list. Here it is, the last item, and the one that says everything. Every other dish on this countdown hid the crime somewhere nearby. This one put it directly on the plate. A federal agent could have ordered a slice of fruit cake off a perfectly legal-looking menu and eaten Prohibition's exact violation without ever knowing it. That is not dessert. That is the entire 13 years of this era, baked into something sweet enough that nobody thought to ask what was really inside it. Closing 30 plates. 30 alibis. Men poached eggs and called it brunch so they could drink at noon. They simmered onions for 8 hours in a room built for 8-minute transactions because some things refused to rush even when everything around them did. They soaked a cake in rum and called it fruit cake and dared anyone to ask twice. None of this was an accident. The cooks behind these doors, most of them never named on a single ledger, never credited on a single menu, understood exactly what they were covering for, and they built food good enough to make federal agents forget to look closer. They were not garnish. They were the operation. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. The modern restaurant, the modern brunch menu, the modern idea of a supper club, all of it was built in basements by people the law was actively hunting, and we never gave them credit for the invention. That is not prohibition. That is theft. Of names, of credit, of an entire era's worth of genius, hidden so well it took 100 years to even ask the question. Comment below and tell me which one your grandmother or your grandfather, behind a bar he never talked about, actually made.